seeing in American elections today. We're seeing untold amounts of money. We're seeing this money that we don't know whether foreign interests or domestic interests are paying for political advertising in U.S. campaigns. And of the domestic interests, we don't know if they're oil companies or drug companies or billionaires who want to avoid the estate tax or carried interest. A company that operates foreign call centers used by U.S. companies pays dues to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The U.S. Chamber then helps outsourcing friendly candidates get elected to Congress. And we should be troubled by this picture. It puts us in a situation where the public has no idea who's spending this money. I want to, before being critical of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I want to make the very clear distinction that Chambers of Commerce I deal with, my 160 roundtables around the state, Chamber representatives have probably been at half of them, and those are the people that every day in the vineyards are working with communities, with mayors, with businesses, with the state to try to attract jobs, and are generally very good, public-spirited citizens. The U.S. Chamber has taken on a whole different role. It's the most politicized U.S. Chamber we've ever seen. It is specializing now in raising huge amounts of money. Some $75 million this year has been spent on political attack ads and electioneering coming from who knows what sources. In Ohio, the Chamber, in a recent 3-week period, spent $566,000 at least on commercials and campaign spending. And so we don't know how much of that has come from foreign contributions. More than 80 foreign companies have contributed more than $885,000 to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. There's no way to know how much of the foreign money is spent on elections and across the nation. The Chamber will tell you they're not doing it, but the Chamber won't show us their books to prove they're not doing it. The Chamber also played a major role in pushing Republicans to filibuster the Disclose Act. The Disclose Act would have brought the transparency to corporate election spending and labor election spending that was made possible by the Supreme Court in Citizens United case. In Citizens United, the activist Roberts Supreme Court, legislating from the bench, held that corporations could spend unlimited funds to intimidate, retaliate against, and replace their opponents in Congress, all in secret, all outside the public eye. The Disclose Act, which newspapers all over the country editorialized for, good government groups supported. The only real opposition to the Disclose Act was the Wall Street Journal and the Chamber of Commerce and the Republican Party that I could see. I mean, very few other than those very conservative business interests opposed it. It would have brought accountability and transparency to the shadows left in the wake of Citizens United. Not one Republican voted to break the filibuster for cloture, which would have got us to 60 votes. So the Chamber, the U.S. Chamber, and Karl Rove and these big money interests who we cannot identify can go their merry way this year, next year, and the following year in spending hundreds of millions of dollars to elect, to defeat their opponents and elect their friends in Congress. If anything should bear the label Made in America, it should be our elections. Transparency matters, disclosure matters. If we're going to create jobs and strengthen our economic recovery, we can't be undermined potentially by foreign companies trying to undermine us. So, I mean, the question ultimately is, what is the United States Chamber of Commerce hiding?
Senator, is there anything you can point to that shows that the Chamber is using foreign interest, or is this merely a case of we don't know because we haven't seen any of them?
I think there's two answers to that. The first answer is if they were not using foreign dollars, I think they would answer the question and prove that they're not. The second reason that there is ample suspicion, and I think very possibly legitimate suspicion, is how hard they lobbied against the Disclose Act and were able to keep all 41 Republicans in line. The same week they lobbied against the legislation that we had to close tax loopholes on outsourcing of American jobs. Those two came at the same time with the same opposition, and it's hard to think they're not connected. For example, there is a tag. If you shut down a plant in Youngstown and you move it to Shanghai, shut down a plant in Columbus and move it to Wuhan, China, you can deduct the cost of the very expensive cost of shutting down your factory. You can actually deduct that against your corporate, U.S. corporate income tax. I mean, what kind of good public policy is that? We tried to change that. Repeal that, instead flip the incentives so the incentives are for creating jobs, not moving jobs overseas, creating jobs in the United States. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Republicans opposed it. And we're successful in stopping the filibuster. I would add one other thing. We're going to do a hearing when I return. I'm chairman of the Economic Policy Subcommittee of the Banking Committee. We're going to do a hearing on the whole issue of outsourcing. And we're going to ask the Chamber of Commerce to testify. The Chamber has had some interesting things to say about outsourcing. President of the Chamber told a reporter, the bottom line, outsourcing has helped our overall economy. And George Bush's top economic advisor, Gregory Mankiw, M-A-N-Q-I-W, if you remember his name, he said outsourcing is just a new way of doing international trade. Clearly, the American public doesn't buy that, and if these are the people spending the money on these campaigns, the public ought to know who they are.
When did this report come out anyway?
3 weeks. I was going to say it was recent. It was about 2 weeks ago. They just did a, I don't know if it's a report, but it was just a compilation of this money in Ohio congressional races. And since then, the Chamber, I believe, I'm not positive, I believe it's the Chamber came in, or it was Roe, came in against Ryan and Wilson, and I think stepped up the money out of those.
Is there any chance that the Senate might take this issue up again in lame duck session?
Well, I hope so. I would hope that some of the Republicans who have been known to occasionally cast aside partisanship, and Republicans that would, like Snell and Collins and Scott Brown, would support it. I'm sure we'll try again. Mitch McConnell, his whole opposition to McCain-Feingold and all these other campaign finance reforms, any kind of limits on spending in any way, his answer was always we should have full disclosure. But it really wasn't, he was never interested in full disclosure because he's not supporting any disclosure legislation now. Their excuse is it's not applied to labor. Yes, it is. We're applying this to everybody that they have to disclose. This bill is trade associations, labor unions, business groups, anybody.